all of us have been to the doctor at some point in our life, probably more than some point, several times, I'm sure. But one day, a doctor called one of his patients to his office to deliver some very important news. The doctor said, "I have received the results of your test, and I have some bad news and some good news." Well, of course, the patient was quiet for a moment, and sensing the gravity of the announcement, well, he said, "Let me have the good news first, Doc." Doctor took a deep breath and said, "You only have 24 hours to live." "Oh my goodness," shouted the patient. "If that's the good news, what is the bad news?" The doctor replied, "Well, I was supposed to tell you this yesterday." You know, very few of us live as if there is no tomorrow. Let's face it. We don't. Most of us live our lives as if there will be many tomorrows. Like the popular musical song from Annie, right? The sun will come out tomorrow. Tomorrow, tomorrow, I love you tomorrow. You're only a day away. And don't get me wrong. In some respects, living as if there will be many tomorrows is good, but in other respects, it can be very bad. If we look forward to tomorrow with hope, then that's a fine perspective. But if we look forward to tomorrow with a haughty spirit, then we are in danger. You know, at the end of chapter 4 of James, he addresses the arrogance that we sometimes display in our lives. Now, after having reminded all of us that we are not to judge and that we need to be humble before the Lord, earlier in the chapter, James applies that same spirit then to our future plans. He begins verse 13 with what I would call a parental authoritarian tone. Look at what he says here, starting there in verse 13 of James 4. Now listen, right? That's what we, whenever somebody's like, that's what I can remember my mom or my dad. Now listen, Chris, okay? That's what I see James here doing. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why do you not even know what will happen tomorrow? See, the truth of the matter is, none of us are in control of the future. And as much as a control freak as I am, I have to accept that. We are not in control of the future, nor do we know what is going to happen in the future. It amazes me how much effort and time we spend trying to predict the future. The weatherman, he has his he or she has their 7 or 10 day forecast, right? Which is always accurate, right? Yeah. The talking heads on TV, they make their predictions about political elections. I mean, we see that going on right now. We also see, if you're a sports fan like me, making predictions about who's going to win this or who's going to win that. There are the daily horoscopes and psychic hotlines. We want to know the future so badly that we'll pay big money. We'll pay big money for a glimpse into the future. But James wants to make it clear that we cannot know the future. We cannot know it. None of us knows for sure what is going to happen tomorrow, let alone tonight. Now, Before we get too far, let me make this clarification. The fact that we cannot predict the future does not negate the need for planning, okay? Now, there is nothing wrong with planning. Of course, we need to plan for the future. Being a good steward of our lives necessitates the making of plans. Jesus advocated planning. He told the person who was getting ready to build a building to sit down and figure out the cost to be sure that he had enough to finish the project. Nothing wrong with planning. Jesus told us also to plan for our future by laying up our treasures in heaven. So James is not against planning, but he is warning us to make sure that we keep God in our plans. Unfortunately, for far too many of us, plan our lives without an eye on God. James encourages us to be thinking, planning, and saying what we read in verse 15. If it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. Okay? That's what he's telling us. We've got to make sure that we are doing. Now go back to verse 14. James then asks a very important question at the end of that verse, and that is simply this. What is your life? What is your life? And his answer is simple. You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Here is a picture of a teapot with steam coming out of it. You've probably, well, not too many people have a teapot nowadays, but this used to be something that was quite common in the kitchen. But the idea is the same. Even if you put on a pot of boiling water, you will see water vapor, right? You will see the evaporation process. That is a water vapor that is a mist. And it's there, and then in a very short period of time, it's gone. We don't see it anymore. It has basically just gone into the room. Here is a picture of a foggy valley. We know that sometimes it gets kind of foggy, right? You go into it and you can't really see what's going on. But by the time we get to 10, 11 o'clock, it's gone. It's over. It's perfectly clear. It has disappeared. Doesn't matter how thick or heavy that fog is. It doesn't remain very long. Folks, that is our life. We are just a mist. We are a fog that appears, and then a short time later, it vanishes. Life is short, regardless of how long you live. Psalm chapter 90, verse 10. We read here, the length of your days is 70 years or 80, if we have the strength. Yet their span is but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. And then in 90, verse 12, we read here, teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So King David is saying that, well, hey, the average life is around 70 years. Maybe you're going to get 80 years. Obviously, some people get longer, right? But anybody who is in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s, could probably attest to just how quickly life has passed. I'm 55. I know for some of you that seems young. To Emma, that's old. And even RJ, that would be old. And I can tell you that 55 years is a blur. I can't even believe that I am 55 years old. Now, some people may say I don't act 55, but I am. My birth certificate proves it. But it's happened so fast. was talking to Michelle just the other day. We were just discussing how quickly, because we're preparing for Madison's wedding. And we were just reminiscing and saying how fast it has gone by. And how close we are to our end. Folks, none of us are guaranteed to receive 70 years, right? I know people who didn't make it to 70 years. I know some people who only made it into their single digits, maybe their teens, maybe their 20s. We're not guaranteed it. We would like to think we have that much time, but we cannot bank on 70 years worth of tomorrows. Or if some of you are already past 70, you can't bank on, 80. And if you're already in your 80s, you can't bank on 90. And if you're in your 90s, can't bank on 100. I don't know if we'll go much further than that, but I guess it is possible. We just don't know when this day or this moment will be our last. I want to just look at a couple of examples of the uncertainty of life. I'm sure all of us remember where we were when we heard about the terrorist attacks, I should say, on September 11th, 2001. And it seems to me just like yesterday. I was getting ready to go to work. I was putting on my uniform, getting ready to go into work that day. And I had the news on, which I always did, always had the news on, watching it while I was getting dressed. And the report came in, the breaking news, that a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. And they were showing video of it. And I looked at that and I thought, well, that's not a small plane based upon the first tower that was hit and the amount of damage that was done to it. It was like, no, that's horrible. How could a plane had, how could a plane run into the World Trade Center? That's just not possible. Well, here's the World Trade Center there before, okay? This second slide is after the first tower had been hit, and that is the second plane. And I remember because I was watching it as that second plane went into the second tower. And then I knew, and the world knew at that time, this was not an accident. This was intentional. Here is the collapse of the first tower. I remember sitting there watching that I thought they would, maybe just get up there and get the fire put out and that would be it. And then you saw that the second tower that was hit, that went down first based upon where the plane hit. It went down, and then the second tower, we know, went down. And the people started, of course, running for their lives as they were trying to escape from that tower as it was falling. And then that's what the New York City skyline looked like without the Twin Towers. Now, here's the most sobering point for me. I can guarantee you that no one that morning who boarded those planes and no one who went to work in the Twin Towers that morning and no one who went to work as a fireman or as a policeman really, truly thought that this was going to be their last day on earth. Now, when I was a police officer, I always knew there was the possibility, just based upon the job. But the fact is, I never believed that it would happen. All of them, I guarantee you, had plans for the day and for later that night and for the next weekend and maybe even for the next year. But thousands of people, they went to meet their Maker that day. Our life is just a mist, and we never know when it will vanish. My second example, and I could give you example after example, but these are just some of the ones that just really stick in my mind. My second example is what occurred on December 26, 2004. There was a very large earthquake that occurred under the Indian Ocean, and it resulted in one of the most devastating tsunamis that we have seen in recent times. Hundreds of thousands of people were caught unaware, and they were swept away in the ensuing flood. Now, there was this Canadian couple. Their name was John and Jackie Nill, and they were from North Vancouver. And they were frequent visitors to a resort there in Thailand. Okay, beautiful resort there. And they were on the beach when the tsunami actually hit. Now, later, after the tsunami and after the waters receded, there was a lot of debris, and their camera was actually found. And when they were able to take the SD card and look at the pictures, they saw the final images that showed a sequence of ocean shots as the effects of the tsunami became a reality. Look at this sequence. And so this is what they were seeing. You can see the waves in the back. And again, you can see a couple boats there, and you can kind of see the waves are getting a little bit bigger. If you're standing on the beach looking at this, you're probably not thinking a whole lot right now. And then you really start to see that what has happened is that the waters have pulled back. And now we really start to see these waves coming in. And they're really coming in. And they get coming, and they're coming closer. And this is either he or she are taking these pictures. Here's somebody finally realizing, it's kind of hard to see probably, but that I got to get out of here. I got to run. And then I believe this was the final picture that was taken on that camera before they were hit by this incredible force of water and swept away. So, like so many, they had no idea what was taking place. They didn't know. I mean, they were there enjoying a beautiful, tropical vacation. And then they went to the beach that morning with no thought that their life would soon be over. Our life is just a mist, and we never know when it will vanish. So what should we do about this fact? Well, James tells us there are 3 sins that we need to avoid. Okay? 3 sins. First, there is the sin of presumption. We cannot presume. The sin of presumption is an arrogant, or maybe not so arrogant, display of pride. Presumption may carry itself with a swagger, as it did the rich fool in Luke 12, who thought he had many years to flaunt and enjoy his wealth. Our presumption may also just be simply quiet, understated presumption that motivates many of our lives, causing us to think that we have all the time in the world to do whatever we plan. We must not act like we are the ones who determine our future. We must learn to humbly acknowledge that all that we are and all that we might be is in the hands of God. Second, the sin of boasting. The Greek word used here has its roots in the characteristic of a wandering quack. Okay, remember the quacks? Which is not unlike the medicine men of the frontier days in America. These quacks offered cures for whatever ailed you, right? Pay this, and they made promises, and they boasted about just what this medicine could do for you. But of course, they boasted of things that they were unable to do. The sin of boasting is based on the invalid assumption that we are able to control our own destiny. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 1. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. How many times have we heard the boasting of young, ambitious individuals? I'm going to be somebody. I'm going to make $1 million before I'm 40. James says there in verse 16, as it is, you boast and brag. All such boasting is evil. The third one, the sin of omission. Verse 17. This is a scary verse. I don't know if it bothers you like it does me, but this one kind of slaps you across the face. Anyone then who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it sins. You know, we always like to think that, well, sin is something that I do, that I commit an offense, right? I told a lie, did this, did that. But James is telling us here, if you know there is something you should be doing, if there is some good that you know you need to be doing, and you don't do it, then you are sinning. This, of course, is the most subtle sin of all, I would say. We know what it is to sin, right? That's it. We know what God has told us not to do. We know that. But we're just not always so inclined to realize that when we don't do what God has told us to do, that is also a sin. James has been, if you look through James and you read James, James has been urging us to be doers of the word and not just hearers. That's not enough. We can't just hear the word. We got to do something with it. Every minute that God gives us to live is a gift. But it is not a gift to be used selfishly. It is a gift to be used in service to God and others. We are privileged to serve as God's ambassadors of love and of grace. And we must not fail to fulfill this mission. Folks, He has given us our marching orders. And to fail to do what He tells us to do is as serious a sin as to do what He has told us not to do. It doesn't matter. It is a sin. So what is our plan of action? Got to have a plan of action. Let me bring this lesson to a close by encouraging us to do three things. First, number one, let's trust God with our lives and futures and live one day at a time. Okay? Let's live one day at a time. I don't know. I don't know how many of you remember this. I'm too young to remember, but I don't know. Maybe some of you remember this. Back years ago, the initials DV were added when writing letters that included any kind of future appointment. Okay? I don't know if any of you have ever heard that, remember that. I don't. Okay? But the word letters DV. Now, the initials stood for the word Dio volente. And it simply meant God willing. So people would put this in their letters. If they were talking about some kind of future event, they would have there at the bottom, DV. And it just simply meant God willing. This will happen. Okay? And that's exactly what James says that we need to be saying. If it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. You know, the Apostle Paul often spoke the very same way. Look with me, Acts chapter 18, verse 21. He told the church at Ephesus, I will come back if it is the Lord's will. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 19. But I will come to you very soon, if the Lord is willing. And then in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 7. I hope to spend some time with you, if the Lord permits. Now, I'm not arguing that we should literally add these words to every communication we make, but it needs to be the attitude, okay? It needs to be our attitude. It needs to be the sentiments of our words. Dio volente, God willing, is our reality and must be our mindset. Second, folks, let's appreciate the moment. Okay? Appreciate the moment. Let's not rush through the present while we move in to the future. How many of you remember Thornton Wilder's Our Town? Boy, this one gets you. Especially the scene, in our town, Emily Gibbs, she's a young mother who died while giving birth, but she's allowed to go back to watch herself living one day of her past life. She chose the day of her 12th birthday, 14 years before her death. And with the excitement of return, she sees the town as it had been on that winter morning of 1899. And with nostalgia, she watches as her then young mother cooks breakfast, and as her father, hiding a surprise gift, calls for his birthday girl. But with wonder tempered by sadness, she softly cries, I can't bear it. They're so young and beautiful. Why did they ever have to get old? And then with mounting frustration, she pleads, oh, Mama, just look at me 1 minute, as though you really saw me. Let's look at one another. And sobbing in grief, Emily cries out, I can't go on. It goes so fast. We don't have time to look at one another. As she asks to be taken away, Emily reflects, I didn't realize. So all that was going on, and we never noticed. Life truly is a vapor that appears for just a little while. Folks, before it vanishes, take notice and take time to thank God for life and for the people before they are gone. Let's appreciate every moment. Don't delay obedience. There's an old fable that tells of 3 apprentice demons who were coming to earth to finish their apprenticeship. They were talking to Satan about their plans to tempt and ruin men. The first said, I will tell them there is no heaven. Satan replied, they'll never believe that. The book of truth is full of messages about the hope of heaven. The second demon says, I will tell them there is no hell. Satan replied, no good. Jesus, while he was on earth, he talked more about hell than of heaven. They will know in their hearts that they're wrong, and they will have to be taken care of in some way. The final demon then said, I know the answer. I'll just tell them there is no hurry. Satan said, go, and you will ruin them by the thousands. The most dangerous delusion of all is that there is plenty of time. None of us know the time, the hour, the day of Christ's return. And none of us know the day or the hour of our own death. We must not delay our obedience. Ultimately, folks, the brevity and the uncertainty of life should not cause us to fear, but should cause us to give our lives to Christ and then trust him. We don't know about tomorrow. We are not promised tomorrow. But we know about him who holds tomorrow. As the song says, we need to hold onto God's unchanging hand.